Hello, how you doing? It is Christmas, December 25th, 2022. Um, I'm dressed quite warmly because there's a problem with the furnace. And also, there's a plumber from Roto-Rooter who was kind enough to come out and work on one of the pipes here. Man, but it is freezing in here. Um, anyway, since it is Christmas, picked a very ironic day to talk about the Lord baby Jesus, the Christ. So I spent half of my life as something like a Christian, I guess, always trying. I mean, I was very interested in the whole love your enemy as yourself and love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Uh, um, the Even, if you think about it, Jesus would have been a very, very radical individual. Um, I don't believe he believed in, and I'm saying it as if he existed, which I'll get to in a moment, but he didn't believe in any private property. I don't think he owned any property. And another thing is that he did not have sex, right? He was completely celibate his entire life. And even before his life, the whole idea of there being a virgin mother, why, you might ask, like, well, why is that good? Why is it good that his mother was a virgin? Like, who cares? Right? What's wrong with having sex, actually? Why is having I mean, she was a married woman, she had a husband. So why would it be what would be wrong for her to have sex? And why did Jesus have to come into the world that way? And then you might ask, why did we need Jesus anyway? And but here we are, our entire calendar, going into the year 2023. I mean, why is it the year 2023? Because supposedly it's 2023 years since the birth of Jesus, which I'm going to argue never happened. So we're celebrating basically a fictitious mythological uh, deity. Now, so I started off at a predominantly black, historically black church, the historic St. Thomas Episcopal Church of Philadelphia. It used to be on 52nd and Parish. Um, my dad was usually a curmudgeon, but he said one thing that really stuck with me. He said he went to St. Thomas because my mother was Catholic, but she had gotten divorced, so that's why I was never Catholic. And I'm grateful that I never had that neurosis. But and Episcopalian faith is kind of like Catholicism light because you can be gay, you can be a you can get divorced. You can actually have premarital sex. I remember my one of the Episcopalian priests, I won't say his name, I think he ended up committing suicide, but I used to go and talk to him because I was really seeking out the meaning of life and everything like that as a teenager, as a 13 to 16-year-old. And he said, remember the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. But anyway, so I spent time there. And then when I was a student at Temple University, I met these people who were part of the Greater Philadelphia Church of Christ, which I now realize is a cult. And I would argue Christianity is a cult, right? It's because the word cult means, the zealous following of an individual. Now, I'm going to argue that not only did is there no evidence that this individual Jesus ever existed. And when I was in the church and at Temple, I took this great class right? It was, called Writing and Critical Thinking, and I remember Temple University was on strike that semester, and the professor, his name was Dr. Peter J. Muckley, or I think he was actually getting his doctorate. He's interesting because he had gone to Oxford as an undergrad, and he was getting his PhD from Temple. I was thinking, I think you might wanna go in the opposite direction. If you're gonna go to Temple and Oxford, I think you'd wanna go to Oxford to get your PhD, but anyway, he was dressed very casual. He, like, those open-toed sandals or whatever, beard, he had, like, a scruffy beard, but the guy seemed to have encyclopedic knowledge. So the first thing he did, he scratched out the word critical thinking. He said, "Well, if you don't know how to think critically, I don't know how to help you because, you know, whatever." He said, "Just write a paper. If you need any help, come to my office." And, so I decided to write a paper trying to prove, uh, Jesus's historicity. And at that point, I was really trying to prove it. And I looked, I searched. I remember I kept getting this book out of the library called, I forgot what it's called, but it was written by Albert Schweitzer. And, he's great, obviously. But it seemed like Josephus and I forgot the other guy, but there's a couple like very vague minor references to Jesus outside of the Gospels. I then, after I left St. Thomas, I joined this, like I said, I joined the Great Philadelphia Church of Christ, and I thought it was godly because, first of all, you had black people, white people, Latinos, Asians, you know, gay, straight, uh, wealthy, poor, highly educated. You had people going to Harvard and Princeton and Swarthmore, etc., and Haverford College, Penn Medical School, and one guy had a PhD from MIT, and just like really smart people. And at the same point, you had people who were working class, and so I said, God would want this kind of diversity, right? Because we're all God's children, so to speak. And I started looking into the Bible. They were very intense. Like they believed in studying the Bible and really living as disciples, they called it. But anyway, as I looked further and deeper into Jesus, the evidence that he lived was kind of flimsy. And then I also started questioning, this idea of love. Like he's saying to you ultimately, here I am, I'm going to die for you, even though you were born in sin and, Eve ate the fruit or I think it was a quince. People say it's an apple, but whatever. It's all made up anyway. But so God had to sacrifice his own son so that I could get this vicarious forgiveness, which is ridiculous. Like we're vicariously punished because of Eve, and then we're vicariously forgiven because of Jesus. Okay. But is that really love? Like hell? Like he's basically saying, if you don't love me back, I'm going to condemn you to eternal damnation. You're going to go to hell. Now, what's loving about that? Then I started more recently, so I haven't really gone to church since about 1999. But I still think about Christianity. I mean, and one of the things that I noticed is, well, I didn't notice, but I used to listen to a lot of the debates online with Richard Dawkins and, highly educated Christians like John Lennox, who I believe is a mathematician. He was a professor at Oxford. He's a devout Christian. And then, of course, there's Christopher Hitchens, and then there's the Richard Dawkins and so forth like that. I don't necessarily agree with all atheists, Daniel Dennett and those guys, Sam Harris. I particularly don't like Sam Harris and his views because even if you're not a Christian or you're an atheist, And of course, there's many other religions, but I'm of course most familiar with Christianity. Um, it doesn't mean I agree with you. You might be an imperialist, like I find Bill Maher, even though he's an atheist, and I thought Religulous was pretty funny. I mean, he takes horrible views. I don't watch his show. I used to like him a lot, but I don't watch his show anymore or really listen to him. But anyway, I came across Richard Carrier, Dr. Richard Carrier, and it's really interesting because he argues. I mean, I'm not that interested in this topic where I'm going to go study it, and get a PhD if they even accepted me. I couldn't imagine studying this topic as a career, but I am sort of interested in it just because I spent so much time in church. And I'm also interested in this whole idea of quote unquote Christianizing the savages, right? So I started looking at, and you can, of course, look at Richard Carrier videos yourself. Um, it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting. He doesn't think Jesus existed at all. And he also believes that through his research, he used Bayes' theorem, which I had never heard of before. But he thinks that not only Jesus didn't exist, but he was meant to be a celestial being. He wasn't really, he was later euhemerized, which means he was turned into human form to make him more believable, right? Then also, the story of Jesus has, I want to say, antecedents, or there were Christ like dying and rising cults going back to at least Inanna, who was a Sumerian goddess. So Carrier's thesis is that Jewish people used, you know, the previous deities as a model, and then just simply adapted the story to Jewish culture. And three of the four gospels, he also argues. I think Mark is the only one that is really written by Mark. The other ones he thinks are actually forgeries of Mark, and that none of these people would have seen Jesus when he was alive anyway. And then there's another good book called The Darkening Age, in which I can't think of the woman's name, but she's saying that the Christians weren't so much persecuted as they were the persecutors, and that's how Christianity spread. And then, so the 3 points I'd like to make are that not original, right? Christianity is not original. It's a Jewish adaptation of previous deities in the area. Jesus did not exist at all. And on some level, I think we all know he didn't exist. So, there was no virgin birth. I mean, Jesus' life defies all physics and biology and everything like that, which the people who were alive who wrote this story would not have understood at all. And I would also argue that the story is not moral, and that the deity, the God of the Bible, Yahweh or whoever, is not moral either. I mean, he's a bit of a nut, actually, a sociopath, homicidal, genocidal sociopath. And the whole impregnating Mary, who was a married teenager, is highly suspect as well. But it's your opinion that matters. You have to come to your own conclusions. That's mine. So now I sort of look to astrophysics and the fact that I view myself as like a primate, has linguistic capacity, and I'm good with that. Like I find solace in that, being a part of nature. And I think that morality is both innate and universal. It is not a matter of Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any of that stuff. That's not where it comes from. We are born much like we have a universal generative grammar. We probably have a there's probably a universal generative morality, which is articulated in the book by Mark Hauser, even though he was fired from Harvard in his book Moral Minds, or John McKell, who's over at Georgetown Law School, I think, still. He wrote Elements of Moral Cognition. I looked that book up on Amazon recently. It costs a lot of money now. I was lucky to get a reasonably priced copy of it several years ago, and I'm holding on to that thing. It's really interesting. For me, it's a no brainer that morality doesn't come from Jesus. Morality comes from ourselves. We're born with it, and then certainly there's nature and nurture, but I think unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath, probably a psychopath, you have some sense of right and wrong, right? And I don't think we needed the Bible to tell us, like, don't murder people, don't steal. We kind of know that, right? So once again, this is Joe Williams. I'm freezing over here, and these are the topics that really interested me: religion, race, class, war, uh, um, those kind of deep, really important, I would say, most important issues. I'm not a trained philosopher or anything like that. I consider myself a bit of a pragmatist. I'm a clinical social worker, but I like to think about, in which I think we're kind of like little philosophers in our own right, because we take on very difficult questions, existential questions. And that's just my view. Like I'm not gonna. First of all, I find that you can't convince. I very much not able to convince people to change their beliefs, and there's no punishment if you don't agree with me. Very much unlike Christianity, where there's no eternal damnation if you don't agree with me. Uh, and I encourage freedom of dissent and thought and different opinions. All right, thank you so much, and Merry Christmas.